1971. From the outside, America appears powerful, large, and confident. But internally, there is a different mood. On the one hand, the Vietnam War rages on. On the other, society is divided. Power displays are still important, but they are no longer as innocent as they once were. It is precisely at this point that the Lincoln Continental Mark III emerges. This car doesn't shout. It makes no claims of speed. It has no pretensions of being sporty. But it says this very clearly. This car says, I am here. The Mark III doesn't offer people a promise of the future. It tries to fix the present. Power, wealth, a sense of control. Therefore, to understand the Mark III, one must first understand the fears of the era. Because this car was born not from a need, but from a psychological void. Translated with dpel.com, free version. Why was there a need for such a car? By the early 1970s in America, the automobile had long ceased to be merely a means of transportation. It was now a statement. Cadillac represented power, but Lincoln was seeking something else. Prestige. The purpose of the Mark III's introduction was not to create a new customer base. It was to offer the existing elite a more appropriate symbol. This car was designed not to accelerate, but to be seen. The long hood, short trunk line, unpretentious yet clean proportions. Every detail said, I'm in no hurry. And that was a very powerful message at the time. Design is not a show, it's an attitude. Nothing in the Mark III's design is accidental. The vertical grille, almost like a facade. Hidden headlights. Not looking, watching. Long body, but not muscular. This design doesn't say, look at me. It says, you will notice me. Because the philosophy of the Mark III is this. True power does not need to explain itself. That's why the lines are not soft. But they are not harsh either. Instead of sharpness, there is control. And this sense of control transforms the car from an object into a stance. This was not paint. If you look closely, you'll see something different. On the ceiling of the Mark III, this is not paint. This is not metal. This is vinyl headliner. And no, this is not a cost-cutting trick. In 1970s America, a vinyl roof was a quiet sign of luxury because it hid the coldness of metal. It gave the car a more homey feel. But in the Mark III, its meaning runs deeper. The vinyl roof visually divides the body in two. The lower part appears strong, heavy, and long, while the upper part is perceived as softer, calmer. This is a deliberate balance. The Mark III's designers didn't want this car to look like a single mass. They wanted it to appear more formal, more established. The vinyl roof also makes a deliberate reference to old American luxury cars. So this roof is not a modern detail. It is a reminder, a silent sentence saying, we are still here. Body dimensions are a language of power. The Mark III is a large car, but not because it is large, but because it needs to appear large. Length, width, high headline. These are not for performance. They are for occupying space. The Mark III doesn't move through traffic. Traffic moves around it. This is more about perception management than engineering. And Lincoln did this deliberately. This car doesn't speed past those beside it, but it slows down those behind it. What changes when you get in isn't speed, it's time. When you open the door of the Mark III, it's not speed that envelopes you. It's silence. The interior is designed not to show off, but to separate. The outside world stops here. The seats are soft, but not loose. The materials are expensive, but don't scream for attention. Everything is in its place. This car doesn't take you somewhere. It takes you away from somewhere. And that's where the Mark III's true power lies. What lies under the hood is not power, but character. When you open the hood of the Mark III, the first thing you notice is not complexity. On the contrary, everything is large, clear, and calm. The engine powering the 1971 Lincoln Continental Mark III is a 460 cubic inch V8. That's about 7.5 liters. But this engine's purpose is not to rev high. It specifically avoids high revs. The large cylinders, long stroke design, and low compression ratio serve one thing: delivering torque early. This engine doesn't like it when you stomp on the gas pedal. In fact, it dislikes it. It prefers a gentle press, a long acceleration, and a smooth flow. It produces around 365 horsepower. But this power is just a number on paper. What really matters is how this engine works. The 460 V8 doesn't rush, even under load. It doesn't produce vibrations. It doesn't raise its voice. This engine is designed more for carrying heavy weight than for high speed. And considering the heavy body of the Mark III, this is a necessity. The engine's cooling system is large. Its lubrication capacity is extensive. Everything is planned for long-term, tireless operation. This is not a race engine, but it is more disciplined than race engines. Because this engine exists not to impress the driver, but to comfort them. And in 1971 America, that was the true meaning of luxury. The numbers were there, but they weren't the story. When you look at the technical specifications of the 1971 Lincoln Continental Mark III, everything seems to be in its place. Big engine, high displacement, plenty of power. But Lincoln wasn't insistent on highlighting these numbers, because the story the Mark III wanted to tell couldn't be captured in a table. This car doesn't care how many seconds it takes to go from 0 to 60, because in its world, time is not a racing element. In the Mark III, the engine's power is not presented as a peak point. That power is an underlying foundation, assumed to be there at all times. When you press the gas pedal, you don't expect an explosion. You don't hear a roar. You just feel the car decide to move. This approach is the essence of the American luxury mindset in the early 1970s. Power is not displayed. It is assumed. That's why Lincoln, when describing the Mark III, chose to speak in feelings, not numbers, because numbers are compared, but feelings are embraced. And that was the Mark III's real goal, to give its driver the feeling of "you belong here." This car doesn't want to compete with other cars. It wants to stand above them. That's why the Mark III's technical specifications, no matter how good they are never the main focus. The main focus is a quiet confidence, and that confidence was one of the most expensive things you could buy at the time. Driving, where noise is deliberately silenced. When the Mark III moves, the first thing you notice isn't acceleration. It's silence. But this silence isn't a byproduct of insulation. It's the goal of the design. The steering response is not quick, but it is not hesitant either. This car does not try to prove anything to you. The suspension is not tuned to make you feel the road. It is tuned to make you forget the road. Potholes are swallowed. Bumps are dampened. As much as acceleration, deceleration is calm. This driving character is not a car choice, but a lifestyle choice. Someone who drives a Mark III doesn't share the same rush as everyone else on the road. It imposes its own tempo, and the road adapts to it. That's why the Mark III isn't driven. It's carried. Competitors were talking louder. There were other luxury cars at the time. There was Cadillac. There were new ideas coming from Europe. Some were sportier. Some were more innovative. Some were louder. The Mark III, however, didn't care about any of that. Cadillac wanted to show its power. The Europeans emphasized agility. Lincoln chose to dominate the road. This wasn't a flaw. It was a choice. The Mark III didn't say the future. It said, we're continuing. And this approach made it unique, but it also made it less accessible to everyone. This car was a result. The Lincoln Continental Mark III was not a beginning. It was never a revolution. This car was a result. It was a product of a time when America needed to feel strong, but didn't want to shout about it. The Mark III didn't race toward the future. It didn't deny the past. It held its ground. And sometimes, that's the hardest decision of all. Not proving anything. Not competing with anyone. Just being there. That's why the Mark III wasn't a car everyone loved. But for those who understood it, it was unlike anything else. And that's why it's still talked about today.